They say revenge is a dish best served cold. Glacier knew better. Revenge wasn't cold at all, it burned with the steady, consuming heat of a carefully tended fire, one that required patience, precision, and an unwavering commitment to watching everything you'd built turn to ash in the hands of those who'd stolen it from you. Her real name was Samantha Morrison, but everyone in the tech world knew her as Glacier. The nickname had stuck during her MIT days, coined by a classmate who'd watched her methodically dismantle a professor's supposedly unsolvable algorithm with an expression of absolute zero. "You're like a glacier," he'd said. "Slow, unstoppable, and you reshape everything in your path." She'd liked it. Kept it. Made it her brand. Now, standing in the floor-to-ceiling windows of her downtown Seattle loft, watching the rain streak down the glass like tears the city was crying on her behalf, Glacier allowed herself a moment to remember. 3 years, 2 months, and 17 days. That's how long it had been since Vincent Ashford and the board of Ashford Dynamics had systematically destroyed everything she'd created. The memory still tasted like copper in her mouth, that final board meeting where Vincent had smiled his shark's smile and announced that the company would be restructuring under new creative direction. Glacier's proprietary AI framework, the one she'd spent 7 years developing, would continue forward without her. The patents she'd filed? Company property, her lawyers had explained with sympathetic expressions that did nothing to soften the blow. The non-compete clause she'd signed in those heady early days? Ironclad. She'd been 29 years old, a rising star in artificial intelligence, and in the span of 3 hours, she'd lost everything. Vincent had offered her a severance package. Generous, he'd called it. Enough to keep her comfortable while she explored other opportunities. She'd looked at the number on that check, then at Vincent's face, the practiced concern that didn't quite reach his pale gray eyes, and understood with perfect clarity that she was being paid to disappear. She'd taken the money. Smiled. Thanked him for the opportunity. And then she'd vanished. Most people think revenge happens quickly, a sudden, violent settling of accounts. Glacier knew that the best revenge was architectural. You didn't just tear down your enemy's house, you carefully removed the foundation while they slept inside, so they'd wake up one day to find themselves falling. She'd spent the first 6 months in a converted warehouse space in Portland, living on instant ramen and spite. Her severance money went into equipment, high-end processors, servers, software licenses. The non-compete clause prevented her from developing AI frameworks for commercial use, but it said nothing about theoretical research, nothing about publishing academic papers, nothing about consulting under pseudonyms for firms in Singapore and Berlin who didn't ask too many questions. She coded 18 hours a day. When she wasn't coding, she was researching, digging through public records, SEC filings, patent applications, conference proceedings. She learned everything about Ashford Dynamics that she hadn't known when she'd been naive enough to trust Vincent's promises. The company had done this before. 3 times, in fact. 3 other founders with proprietary technology, all of them squeezed out after their innovations had been absorbed into Ashford's portfolio. One had ended up teaching at a community college. Another had left the tech industry entirely. The third had started a blog about corporate malfeasance that nobody read. Glacier would not be the fourth. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning at 3:47 a.m. She'd been awake for 36 hours, her eyes burning, her back screaming in protest, when the code finally compiled without errors. The framework she built, she called it Prometheus, because it felt like stealing fire from the gods, was everything her original work had been, refined and reimagined and utterly, completely different from anything Ashford could claim ownership of. More importantly, it was better. She'd learned from her mistakes. The original framework she developed for Ashford had been brilliant but resource-intensive, requiring massive processing power that limited its commercial applications. Prometheus was elegant, streamlined, capable of running on a fraction of the hardware. She'd solved problems she hadn't even known existed 3 years ago. She registered the patents under a shell company in Delaware, filed through a law firm in New York that specialized in discretion. The papers went through in 8 months. Ashford's legal team never noticed. By the end of year 2, she'd started her own company. She called it Aurora Systems, chose a logo that suggested dawn breaking over mountains, and operated out of a small office in Vancouver with a team of 5 brilliant developers she'd poached from companies that had rejected them as not a cultural fit. She knew what that phrase meant. It meant they were too smart, too difficult, too unwilling to smile while mediocre men took credit for their work. Her team was loyal in the way that only the discarded can be loyal. They'd all been burned. They all understood that Aurora wasn't just a company, it was a statement. Aurora Systems didn't advertise. Glacier had learned that lesson too. Instead, she reached out quietly to the companies that would benefit most from her technology, mid-sized firms that were hungry, innovative, tired of being crushed by giants like Ashford Dynamics. She offered them solutions that were faster, cheaper, and demonstrably superior to anything on the market. Word spread in the way that truly valuable information always spreads, quietly, person to person, like a secret everyone wants to be in on. Vincent Ashford was 53 years old, handsome in the way that expensive dental work and personal trainers can make a man handsome, with silver threading through his dark hair in a way that suggested distinction rather than age. He'd built Ashford Dynamics from a small consulting firm into a major player in enterprise AI solutions, and he'd done it by being smarter, more ruthless, and more patient than his competitors. His weakness was his ego. He genuinely believed he was the smartest person in any room, and that belief made him sloppy. He didn't see the threats until they were already inside the walls. His second in command was a woman named Helena Frost, the company's chief technology officer. Helena was 41, Cambridge-educated, and sharp as broken glass. She'd been the one to suggest bringing Glacier into Ashford Dynamics in the first place, back when Glacier had been publishing groundbreaking papers and drawing attention at conferences. Helena had seen the potential, had courted her aggressively, had made promises about resources and support and freedom to innovate. Those promises had lasted exactly as long as it took to get Glacier's signature on the contract. Glacier didn't hate Helena. Hate required emotion, required caring, and Glacier had learned to operate in a space beyond such concerns. But she did respect Helena's intelligence, which made her dangerous. Helena would notice things that Vincent missed. Helena would need to be handled carefully. The third key player was Thomas Brennan, Ashford's chief financial officer, a nervous man with thinning hair who lived in constant fear of SEC investigations and quarterly earnings reports. Thomas wasn't cruel or particularly ambitious. He was simply a man who'd chosen safety over integrity so many times that he'd forgotten there was a difference. The first strike came in the form of a Forbes article. Glacier had cultivated a relationship with a journalist named Sarah Chin over 18 months, feeding her stories about Aurora Systems' meteoric rise, providing her with exclusive access to beta tests and client testimonials. Sarah was smart, thorough, and she had a particular interest in stories about women in tech who'd been screwed over by the industry. The article ran on a Monday morning. Aurora Systems, the AI startup that's quietly revolutionizing enterprise solutions. It was glowing. It was detailed. It mentioned Glacier by name exactly once, in a paragraph near the end that noted Aurora's founder preferred to let her work speak for itself. But it devoted 3 full paragraphs to comparing Aurora's Prometheus framework to Ashford Dynamics' flagship product, making it clear, with carefully cited benchmarks and independent testing, that Prometheus was superior in every measurable way. The article also included quotes from several former Ashford clients who'd recently switched to Aurora, discussing their reasons for the change. Glacier read it on her tablet while drinking her morning coffee, and allowed herself a small smile. Vincent called an emergency board meeting that afternoon. The Forbes article was just the beginning. Over the next 3 months, Glacier executed her plan with the precision of a master surgeon. She'd timed everything perfectly. Ashford Dynamics had 3 major contracts up for renewal in Q3. She'd known about them, she'd been there when they were negotiated, had helped develop the technology that landed them in the first place. She'd reached out to those clients quietly, through intermediaries, offering them demonstrations of what Prometheus could do. 2 of the 3 contracts switched to Aurora. The loss hit Ashford's quarterly earnings hard enough that their stock price dropped 11% in a single day. The board demanded answers. Vincent provided reassurances. Helena started asking uncomfortable questions about how a 3-year-old startup had managed to develop technology that outperformed Ashford's multi-million-dollar research division. Glacier, watching from Vancouver, felt nothing. Or rather, she felt everything compressed into a single, cold point of satisfaction. This was what justice felt like when you built it yourself, carefully, from the ground up. Helena Frost wasn't stupid. She downloaded the Forbes article, read it 3 times, then opened the file she kept on former employees, people who'd left under less than ideal circumstances, people who might hold grudges. Samantha Morrison's name was there, of course. Helena remembered her. Brilliant. Difficult. Proprietary about her work in a way that had become problematic when the company needed to scale and productize. Helena pulled up Morrison's non-compete agreement, reviewed the terms, then started digging into Aurora systems. The company was privately held, its ownership structure buried behind layers of shell corporations and LLCs. She hired a forensic accounting firm to track the money, hired a patent lawyer to review Aurora's intellectual property filings, looking for anything that might overlap with Ashford's existing patents. They found nothing actionable. The Prometheus framework, while clearly inspired by similar goals as Morrison's original work, was architecturally distinct. Different approach, different implementation, different results. Any legal challenge would be expensive, time-consuming, and would draw attention to the fact that Aurora's product was demonstrably better than theirs. Helena reported her findings to Vincent over lunch at his favorite restaurant, keeping her voice low. "It's her," she said. "It has to be. The timing is too convenient, the technology too similar in purpose." Vincent cut into his steak with more force than necessary. "Can we stop her? Legally?" "No. The non-compete is expired, and even when it was active, she stayed within its bounds. She's been careful." "Then what do you suggest?" Helena set down her fork. "We need to innovate. Actually innovate, not just acquire. We've been coasting on Morrison's work for 3 years, and we've let it stagnate. She's moved forward. We need to move faster." Vincent didn't like that answer. Vincent liked answers that involved lawyers and settlements and making problems disappear through the application of money and power. But he was smart enough to recognize when he was cornered. "Set up a war room," he said. "Pull our best people. I want a response to Aurora's framework in 6 months." Helena nodded, though they both knew 6 months wasn't enough time. In tech, 6 months might as well be 6 years. Glacier's next move was elegantly simple. She started recruiting. Not openly, that would have been crude. Instead, she attended conferences, spoke on panels, published papers. She made sure she was visible, that people in the industry knew Aurora Systems was growing, innovating, winning. She made sure they knew Aurora treated its people well, valued their contributions, shared equity generously, and then she waited for Ashford's people to come to her. They did. 3 of Ashford's senior developers reached out within 2 months, all of them burned out, all of them tired of watching Vincent take credit for their work, all of them intrigued by what they'd heard about Aurora's culture. Glacier hired 2 of them. Both had been part of the team trying to maintain and update her original framework. Both brought with them an intimate understanding of Ashford's current technical limitations and strategic plans. Nothing they shared violated their NDAs, Glacier was careful about that. But their knowledge informed her strategy, helped her anticipate Ashford's moves, showed her exactly where the company was weakest. She targeted those weaknesses with the focus of a sniper. By the end of year 3, Ashford Dynamics was hemorrhaging clients. The industry had noticed that Aurora wasn't just better, it was cheaper, more reliable, and backed by a company that seemed to actually care about innovation rather than just quarterly earnings reports. Vincent tried to respond. He authorized a massive R&D budget increase. He hired expensive consultants. He gave interviews claiming that Ashford was on the verge of revolutionary breakthroughs in AI technology. But money couldn't buy time, and Ashford had wasted too much of it resting on stolen laurels. The board grew restless. Shareholders filed lawsuits claiming mismanagement. Helena, reading the room with her usual precision, started quietly updating her resume. Thomas Brennan, the anxious CFO, began having panic attacks in his office. The company's debt load was becoming untenable. The stock price had dropped 40% from its high. There was talk of layoffs, restructuring, maybe even bankruptcy. And through it all, Aurora Systems grew steadily, methodically, like its namesake Glacier, slow, inevitable, reshaping the landscape as it advanced. The call came on a Thursday evening. Glacier was in her office, reviewing code with her lead developer, when her personal phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, saw the name, and felt something cold settle in her chest. Vincent Ashford. She'd been waiting for this call for 3 years. She let it ring 4 times before answering, just to let him know she wasn't eager. Samantha, Vincent said, his voice carrying none of its usual confidence. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. It's Glacier, she said. And actually, I'm quite busy. What can I do for you, Vincent? A pause. She could hear him recalibrating, adjusting to the fact that she wasn't going to make this easy. I'd like to meet, he said. Discuss the possibility of a collaboration between our companies. I think there could be significant mutual benefit. No. Another pause, longer this time. I'm sorry? I said no, Vincent. I'm not interested in collaborating with Ashford Dynamics. I'm not interested in being acquired. I'm not interested in anything you might want to offer me. Samantha, Glacier, I understand you might have some lingering resentment about how things ended between us. But this is business. Surely we can move past personal feelings? This is business, she interrupted, her voice calm, factual. And the business reality is that Aurora Systems is outperforming Ashford Dynamics across every meaningful metric. In another 6 months, you'll have lost enough market share that your board will force you out. In a year, you'll be fielding acquisition offers from companies looking to pick over the corpse of what you built. That's not resentment, Vincent. That's just the natural consequence of your choices. She could hear his breathing, harsh and rapid on the other end of the line. You did this, he said. You planned this. This whole thing was revenge. No, Glacier said, and meant it. This wasn't revenge. Revenge would have been quick, emotional, unsatisfying. This was justice. There's a difference. What difference? Justice builds something new. Revenge just destroys. I didn't destroy your company, Vincent. You did that yourself the moment you decided that stealing was easier than creating, that exploitation was more profitable than collaboration. I just made sure the market had a better option. Capitalism did the rest. She heard him start to respond, then cut him off. Don't call again, she said, and ended the call. 3 months later, Vincent Ashford resigned as CEO amid what the press delicately termed strategic differences with the board. Helena Frost took over as interim CEO, immediately announced a company restructuring, and began reaching out to potential acquisition partners. 6 months after that, Ashford Dynamics was acquired by a Chinese tech conglomerate for a fraction of what it would have been worth 5 years earlier. Vincent's golden parachute softened his landing, but his reputation in the industry was finished. He'd be remembered as the man who'd let a startup eat his company alive because he'd been too arrogant to recognize real competition when it emerged. Thomas Brennan retired to Arizona, took up golf, and stopped having panic attacks. Helena landed on her feet with a VP position at a major tech firm. She'd been smart enough to distance herself from the sinking ship before it went under completely. And Aurora systems continued to grow. On the 5-year anniversary of the day she'd been forced out of Ashford Dynamics, Glacier stood once again at her window, looking out at Seattle's rain-soaked skyline. Aurora now employed 300 people across 4 offices. Her net worth had crossed 9 figures. Forbes had featured her on their cover with the headline, "How One Woman Built an AI Empire from the Ashes of Betrayal." She'd won. By every measurable standard, she'd won. So why did it feel so hollow? She thought about the years she'd spent building Aurora, the 18-hour days, the relationships she'd neglected, the life she'd deferred in service of this single, consuming purpose. She thought about the person she'd been before Vincent's betrayal, younger, more optimistic, still capable of trusting that merit and hard work would be enough. That person was gone. Glacier had built something powerful from her ashes, but the cost had been steep. Her phone buzzed. A text from her lead developer, "Board meeting pushed to 3 p.m. Also, your mother called the office. Said you haven't returned her calls in 3 weeks." Glacier stared at the message for a long moment, then looked back out at the rain. She'd spent 5 years proving that she couldn't be destroyed, that she was stronger and smarter and more resilient than the system that had tried to grind her down. She'd won her war against Vincent Ashford and everything he represented. But in the process, had she lost something essential? Had she become so focused on being unstoppable that she'd forgotten how to simply be? She didn't have an answer. Maybe that was something she'd need to figure out in whatever came after revenge. For now, though, she had a company to run, employees who depended on her, clients who trusted her vision. The war might be over, but the work continued. That was the thing about justice, it didn't end with a satisfying climax. It just became the new normal, the foundation for whatever came next. Glacier typed a quick response to her developer, confirming the meeting time. Then she pulled up her mother's contact information and stared at it for a long moment before finally pressing call. "Mom," she said when the line connected. "It's me. I know I've been absent. I'm sorry. Can we talk?" Outside, the rain continued to fall on Seattle, washing everything clean, preparing the ground for new growth. And inside her loft, Glacier, Samantha Morrison, took the first tentative step toward figuring out who she was when she wasn't at war. The Glacier had reshaped the landscape, exactly as glaciers do. Now it was time to see what could grow in the wake of all that devastating, necessary change. 2 years later, Glacier received an invitation that made her pause. A conference. Women in Tech, Building the Future. The organizers wanted her to keynote, to tell her story, to inspire the next generation of women who were fighting the same battles she'd fought. She almost declined. The idea of reducing her experience to an inspirational narrative felt reductive, false. Her story wasn't about triumph in some simple, motivational poster sense. It was about survival. About what you became when you chose not to let betrayal define you, but instead used it as fuel. But as she read through the invitation, she thought about all the young women who were out there right now, in their own versions of that final board meeting, being told their work would continue without them. How many of them would disappear into bitterness and obscurity? How many would fight? She accepted the invitation. The conference was in San Francisco. Glacier stood backstage, listening to the moderator introduce her, listing her accomplishments in a way that made them sound inevitable rather than hard-won. Then she walked onto the stage, faced the audience of hundreds of women, and told them the truth. "I'm supposed to tell you that everything worked out," she began. "That justice prevailed, that hard work and talent are enough, that the system works if you just believe in yourself." But that would be a lie. She saw surprise ripple through the crowd. "The truth is that I got lucky. Lucky that I had the skills to build something new. Lucky that I had enough money to survive while I did it. Lucky that the market conditions were right for a competitor to emerge. A lot of people in my situation don't get those lucky breaks, and they lose anyway, and that's not their fault. The system is designed to protect people like Vincent Ashford, not people like us. She paused, letting that sink in. But here's what I want you to understand, even though the system is rigged, even though the odds are against us, even though we're going to work twice as hard for half the recognition, we can still win. Not by playing their game, but by changing the rules entirely. By building something so undeniably better that they can't ignore it. By being so meticulous, so strategic, so absolutely prepared that when opportunity comes, we're ready to seize it. She saw women nodding, taking notes, leaning forward. Revenge isn't about destruction, Glacier continued. It's about refusing to let them make you disappear. It's about taking all that anger and hurt and betrayal and transmuting it into something constructive. It's about proving that they were wrong about you, about showing them exactly what they lost when they decided you were disposable. She told them about the dark nights, the moments of doubt, the sacrifices. She told them about the cost of her victory, the relationships strained, the years consumed, the version of herself she'd had to become to survive. I won my war, she said. But winning isn't the end of the story. What comes after, figuring out who you are when you're not fighting anymore, that's the part they don't tell you about. That's the part I'm still figuring out. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. Women stood, some of them crying, all of them seeing their own struggles reflected in her story. Afterward, during the reception, a young woman approached her. She couldn't have been more than 25, with nervous eyes and a portfolio clutched against her chest. Ms. Morrison, she said. Glacier. I just wanted to thank you. I'm working for a company right now they're taking my work, crediting my manager, and I've been thinking about just quitting, just walking away. But hearing you talk, I think I'm going to stay. I think I'm going to fight. Glacier looked at this young woman, saw her younger self reflected there, and felt something shift inside her chest. Fight smart, she said. Document everything. Build your network. Understand your value and never settle for less than it's worth. And remember, this isn't about revenge. It's about justice. There's a difference. The young woman nodded, tears in her eyes, and walked away. Glacier stood there, watching her disappear into the crowd, and realized something profound. The best revenge wasn't just rebuilding what had been taken from her. It was ensuring that the next generation had the tools, the knowledge, and the courage to fight their own battles. Aurora Systems would be her legacy in one sense, a company that valued innovation, that treated people with respect, that proved you could be successful without exploitation. But her real legacy would be this: the women she inspired. The ones who saw her story and decided not to disappear. The ones who took their betrayals and transmuted them into fuel for something new. That, she thought, was what justice looked like in the end. Not just personal victory, but systemic change, one battle at a time. Glacier left the conference that evening with a clarity she hadn't felt in years. She'd spent 5 years reshaping the landscape through sheer force of will, moving slow and unstoppable like her namesake. Now it was time to see what could grow in the wake of that change. The war was over. The work continued. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough.